Chapter 14, Fuck Your Guns, September 2002. The next week was busy as hell. Flew to New York City on September 9th to be part of an ATF peer support team and to go to some 9/11 memorial events. While I was there, I hit a local biker bar named Hogs and Heifers to throw back some drinks with other agents, including Karen, a female special agent based in New York. I was extra cocky that night. I put a call in to Bad Bob saying I was in New York on a collection. I asked if I could go visit the boys at the 3rd Street Clubhouse. He told me he had to make some calls. He called back 15 minutes later. He said I should call Brandon, the New York City P, at such and such number. I did, and Brandon said, "Fuck yeah, come over." I was dumbstruck. The New York P was a guy known around the biker world. He didn't know me, ain't nobody from a nothing club, a damn thing. Bob's willingness to vouch for me opened that door. As I left, Karen implored me not to go, saying it was stupid to go without any cover. I asked, "Go where?" She said, "You're going to meet the Hells Angels, Jay." I don't know where you got that from, and besides, fuck the Hells Angels. I'm not worried about what they're going to do to me. They should be worried about what I'm going to do to them. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'm glad I'm not working with you. You're out of your mind. If you leave, I'm going home." This was probably the first time during Black Biscuit that my desire to succeed overcame my common sense. I flagged a cab and said, "Take me to the Hells Angels, dude." He didn't know where that was. I said, 3rd Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues. I was scared. I'd been scared a lot lately, and I was getting kind of used to it. Jesus hates a pussy, but I couldn't believe what I was doing. As the cab crossed town, I told myself I couldn't chicken out. I thought of the time I went to bungee jumping, of how terrified I was at the thought of jumping off a bridge, only to be saved by a glorified rubber band. I remembered how every nerve in my body told me not to jump, while my mind screamed, "You need to jump, you need to man up and just do it, dude." I threw myself off that bridge. It was almost more than I could handle, but it was exhilarating and worth the fear. That's what it came down to. Were the risks taken worth fear? Would I be able to live with myself if I'd given up? No. I'd have no respect. How could I expect people, my family, my partners, even the people I investigated, to respect me if it was obvious I didn't respect myself? We pulled up. I paid. I got out and lit a cigarette. I crossed the street. The New York Hells Angels lived on arguably the safest block in New York City. They owned an entire tenement building. It was painted black. The sidewalk in front of their building was cordoned off with barrels and bikes. There were plenty of cameras trained on the front and the street. The sidewalk was so clean it looked like someone had polished it. I knocked. A small shade slid open. A pair of black eyes. A voice asked, "Who is it?" I said, "I'm Bird. Brandon's expecting me." The door opened. A big dude, like 5 bushels of wheat big, blocked the opening. He said he was lumpy. I held my smart-ass tongue, shook his hand, and went inside for the nickel tour. This was a museum, HA paraphernalia everywhere, going way back. Pictures, plaques, flags, framed in memoriam cuts and tabs, old guns, a battle axe, helmets, knives, newspaper clippings, even decommissioned bikes. It was Hell's Angels heaven. I was zooming. I'd fallen back under my own spell. I didn't stay long. I only wanted to pay my respects. I bought some t-shirts to show the boys out west. I met a few guys, one of whom which was among the scariest dudes I'd ever laid eyes on. He was only 5'11", but he weighed about 300 pounds and didn't have an ounce of fat on him. He was an Illinois Angel named Angel Ch14. The scariest thing about him wasn't his size. It was his smile and easy laugh. It looked and sounded kind, but what it said underneath was, "Hey man, nice to meet you. I'd love to bash your head in on the curb. Want to go outside?" I steered clear of him. Brandon asked if I wanted a sausage from a Fair First on West Avenue. He said they made them real nice, Italian style, with peppers and onions on soft bread. I declined. I left not 20 minutes after having arrived. I decided to check out Ground Zero. I wanted to do a right thing for the right reasons. Something in me had to push back against the impulsiveness and recklessness of Bird. I got there around 10 at night. The streets were quiet. There was the pit, still in disarray, flooded with lights. high fencing cordoned off the area with pieces of paper and photos and posters laced into the lattice of the fence. A small group of people huddled at the corner of Church and Vesey. They looked like Mennonites. The men bearded, the women in bonnets and wearing dresses that looked like 19th century kitchen aprons. The previous night, 2 columns of blue light had shown up from a huge array of spotlights, reaching the heavens, honoring the souls lost that day and the ghosts of the buildings gone. Everything felt respectful. I forgot who I was and who I was pretending to be, who the angels were and who they were pretending to be. I was in the biggest, busiest city in the country, and it was almost entirely silent. I stared at a fluttering American flag. For a few minutes, I put everything aside. Then I got on the train and went back to my hotel in Brooklyn. I flew home on September 13th. I landed in Tucson, got in my car, and drove home. I never settled in. The things I did around the house, I did poorly. I mowed the lawn, neglecting whole tracks, leaving mohawks in the grass. Gwen scolded me. I knew something wasn't right. The old me, the real me, would have been correcting mistakes. My current incarnation didn't care. All I wanted was to go back to work. The afternoon before I left, Dale had some friends over for a pool party. I watched them in their bathing suits, 12 and 13-year-old girls on the verge of growing up. And all I could think about were the women the bikers hung out with, the old ladies, the daughters, the whores. I could confidently guess how the lives of these women had differed from Dale's and her friends. How it was that some women ended up in Hell's Angels clubhouses as drug mules and dealers, waiting for their old man to come around so he could demand and get a blowjob or whatever else he wanted. I knew with dead certainty that these women had fathers who were never there for them, who never showed them any love or showed them too much of the wrong kind of love, who never told them they were valuable in any way. It hurt to watch my daughter play with her girlfriends as these specters hung over me. It hurt to think that, given some bad breaks and poor decisions, it was possible, though unlikely, that any of these girls splashing in my pool could be in similar circumstances in a few years. I called Dale over, interrupting her friend. She had to get out of the pool and wasn't happy about having to do something for her dad. She pleaded, "What is it, Daddy?" As she stopped in front of me, I said, "This is important, Shoei. When Jack was a baby, he pronounced sister as Shishu, which Gwen and I changed to Shoei, and which stuck. So listen carefully, okay?" She threw out an impatient hip and rolled her eyes. "Just hear me out, okay? I need to tell you this. Right now, is this about boys? It's not about boys, not really. It's more about you. Just listen. Never, ever do anything that you don't want to just because someone else says so. If someone wants something from you that you don't want to give, then you don't give it. Understand?" She didn't say anything. It was too awkward. Even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew Gwen would have to clarify the message later. What I'm saying is, you're the most important person in the world to yourself. If you carry yourself with respect and determination, you'll be fine. Other people won't respect you unless you respect yourself first. Understand? "I guess so, Daddy. Just don't forget, you have only one reputation, so guard it and protect it. Don't let anyone tell you what to do." She straightened up with a quirky smile. "But you're telling me what to do right now, smart ass. Listen to your old man on this one, okay?" "Okay." She turned and ran back to her friends, her wet feet slapping the patio. "I love you, Shuey." She stopped, turned around, and shot daggers at me, and ran off that much faster. Her friends giggled. The rest of the day and night dragged on. I couldn't stop thinking about the case. That evening, I played catch with Jack and actually dropped a couple of soft, high-acting pop-ups. Later that night, Gwen and I didn't have sex, which wouldn't have been that unusual, except that she had to point it out to me. Sex hadn't even crossed my mind. As I got to the undercover car the next morning, Jack handed me 2 more of his rocks. He smiled and repeated the gesture of folding my fingers around them. I kissed his head, put them on my dashboard, told him I loved him, and left. I met Carlos to do some Tucson gun deals that Timmy and Pops had set up. It was going to be our first big day of dealing, which was good, because Slats was getting anxious. He'd been putting the screws to us to procure some evidence. We knew that all the protocol stuff we'd gone through, all the approvals and permissions, were good backgrounds for the Ricos. But none of it meant anything if we couldn't demonstrate that the Hells Angels engaged in criminal enterprise. Carlos and I met at one of Solos' clubhouses, a Waffle House on Grant Street in 110. We chowed on the Solos Angels special, pecan waffles with fried eggs and bacon. We waited for our contact, Doug Dam, a Tucson Hells Angels, to give us a call and get things rolling. We ran recording devices that day, but they weren't transmitting wires. In order for the undercover team to follow us, we'd have to call and let them know where we were headed. Doug called Carlos. He told us to meet him at his place. We paid the waitress, who, no joke, was named Flo, and who had a flowery palladium explosion of a hairdo, and left. We met Doug in his front yard. He was 6 feet tall and a shade under 200 pounds. His eyes looked like windows into the soul of a very intense or very stupid individual. He sported the standard Hells Angels facial hair and wore a thin silver chain and cross around his neck. His rep was that of an unstoppable street fighter. He routinely traveled the country to resolve angels' problems with his fist. He shook our hands. He said we had a lot of running around to do and needed to eat first. Carlos suggested Waffle House number 2, this one at 22nd Street and I-10. Ah, the Waffle House, a finer undercover cop restaurant there never was. Bad coffee, below average service, good waffles, easy on the wallet, and hard on the digestive tract. Smells familiar, just like the funk underneath your big toenail does. Has practicality written all over it, especially since, for some bizarre reason, they always have open parking lots with views in 3 directions, the 4th being blocked by the Waffle House itself. Good for surveillance and a lack of surprises. Yes, when I or any of my law enforcement brothers are cruising down the road and see those 11 yellow squares containing those 11 black letters, there is little we can do but be drawn to them, like moths to a porch light, except that we crave a cup of coffee in a questionably clean mug. We told Doug we'd pay, and Carlos and I had seconds of pecan waffles. Doug actually finished his meal with ice cream. Spooning scoops of vanilla into his goatee mouth, he said, "Here's the deal. I got a 38 and a 40 semi-auto back at my place. The 40 cal isn't clean, so don't get caught with it. I got another gun too, but can't sell it." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, smearing white cream into his mustache. He leaned in and whispered, "It was used in a serious crime, and it has to go to the river." So I whispered back, "We understand. Occupational hazard." Right. Doug was a talkative son of a bitch. Getting info out of him was like fishing with dynamite. "Thanks for moving this stuff today. I really need the dough." Carlos stepped in. "Hey, we thought you guys were doing pretty good down there." We knew they weren't. "Not really. I had a nice bulk pot thing going, but since I got picked up on this last year, it's been pretty dead. But man, those were the days. I could get shit down here for about $400 a pound, drive it to Maine, where I used to live, and sell it for 3 times as much. Used to move shit for a supplier, 500 pounds a trip. But I got wise and started taking smaller loads of my own, so I wouldn't have to pay anyone else. But like I said, that stopped for now." I said, "Sounds like our thing with the iron. We got those Mexican boys by the balls with one hand and the throat with the other." "How'd you mean?" "Man, I'm the source and the distributor. No middleman. The alpha and the omega, baby. I show up with a load of pistols and I set the price. Supply a motherfucking demand. Econ 101. Sounds just like my pot thing," he said longingly. Then he added, "Sep, I didn't have no border patrol to fuck with me." I said, "Yeah, well, occupational hazard." Doug laughed as he souped up the melted ice cream. "Nah, we don't got it as good as Mesa. I'll tell you that. Tucson's had some tough times. First, we only got 6 members, not counting the couple guys in prison on some ATF bullshit. Then we got another member, our tattoo guy, Mac, who's got a non-association clause as part of his probation. And we got Jojo, who just got out of the joint and whose leg is all fucked up. We got me, who just got my bike's license plates revoked for lack of insurance and who barely beat out a 3rd strike felony for the pot thing last year. Acted as my own lawyer, I'll tell you that. He hadn't." Carlos said, "Wow." And then we got Fang, who did a 16-year murder lick and who doesn't want to go back to prison, but who still doesn't give a fuck. You'll meet him later. He's got some goods too. Anyway, I'm telling you, man, if the fucking feds wanted to throw Rico our way, it wouldn't take much but some scotch tape to make it stick. Sweet. Slats would like the sound of that. Carlos looked at Doug, nodding seriously. In the meantime, he played a subtle game of footsie with me under the table, like we were teenagers macking the same girl. Carlos got off on making light of any situation. I told Doug about our cash contributions to Mesa and said if things worked out, then we'd throw some proceeds from the Mexican markup. That it was the only decent thing to do. Doug said he and all the boys, who he insisted never did anything without group approval, an important point for our records, would really appreciate that. So we all began the deal. Before we left the second Waffle House, I called Slats from the bathroom and gave him Doug's address. Slats said he parked the van 4 blocks away and could be there in a flash. I said good, but I didn't think there was much to worry about. I said, sit back and pound the Diet Cokes. Shut up, he coughed. We went to Doug's and he gave us a .38 Taurus blue steel 5-shot revolver and showed us the dirty gun, a 9mm unknown make that he couldn't sell. He said the .40 caliber was at Fang's and that we'd have to go over there to get it, but that he would take the money now. Carlos gave him the $800 for the 2 pistols, plus the $50 commission. Doug put the $800 in his back pocket and the $50 in his wallet. He told us that was all he was going to make for the day's work. I thought, dude, one day you're going to go to prison for a long time on a 3rd strike because you were jonesing for $50? Pathetic. Doug got in his car and we followed him to Fang's. Carlos called Slats and told him where we were headed. He told him we'd have these guys all prosecutable by 3 in the afternoon, that things were going easy, which they were. We are veteran ATF agents doing our thing. Over the years, Carlos and I bought so many guns between us, it was like picking up milk on the way home. We pulled into Craig Fang Kelly's driveway at 1501 South Winmore around 1 in the afternoon. He offered us beer and we took him up on it. I asked him where the .40 cal was and Fang said it wasn't here, that he had trouble getting it and that we'd likely have to pick it up at the house of Tucson Angel Mark McPherson, but that he and Doug had to make some calls first. He said we could wait outside if we wanted. Carlos pulled the shade aside. In the backyard was a metal table and a basketball hoop. Carlos and I looked at each other and nodded. Okay, we wait outside. As we walked toward the table, Carlos said, I got $50. Says you can't dunk anymore, Bird. And you can? You know it. Carlos was a Division II All-American defensive back and punt returner. Dude, no way you can dunk and I don't. Alright, let's find out. Alright then. We looked for a ball. No surprise, there wasn't one. Can't imagine the Hells Angels squaring off for a game of shirts and skins. The hoop must have been left by some last tenant. I held up my car keys. Well, we'll use these. Alright, who goes first? You do, shorty. Bet, I'm on it. Carlos stripped to his undershirt. I didn't have to, since that was all I was wearing, but I did put my shoulder holster on the table. We both had on jeans and motorcycle boots. I threw Carlos my keys. He walked under the hoop, held up his arm to measure the distance, which was about 3 feet from his fingertips, and then stepped back several paces. He got in a ready position and rocked back and forth, jangling the keys in his right hand. I was glad Slats was on the wire. He would have been calling us right then to tell us to stop, but he couldn't. That was a big reason why I loved working with Carlos. He kept me light on my feet. He jumped and was well short. His boots skidded on the ground. He said, best of 3, and tried 2 more times, never even getting close. I said, give me those and let me show you how it's done. In my day, I could throw down with both hands. I didn't bother measuring the distance. Either I'd make it or I wouldn't. I took a running start from the side of the rim. When I got to about 3 feet, I leapt. My left arm extended. I touched the rear of the rim, but I couldn't get above the cylinder. I came down in a graceless thud, my boots also skidding along the ground. My back shot through with pain. Nothing serious, just a reminder that I was old and no longer cut out for things like dunking. The keys, however, stayed put, wedged between the rim and the backboard. Carlos laughed his ass off. He said he'd give me $25 for my efforts. He said, well, we'll just give the Merc to Doug for payment. He can scrap it and turn it into Hell's Angels t-shirts for an 8-ball or whatever. I said, shut up. Carlos laughed some more. I tried to jump and retrieve the keys, but my bounce was all gone. I couldn't touch the rim. I was glad Jack wasn't there to see me. Carlos took 4 running jumps, but was still a mile away. I said, alright, get on my shoulders. Fuck that. Fuck nothing, get on my shoulders. I'll pay you $25 to do it, we'll be even. Fine. I took a knee. Carlos got behind me and straddled my shoulders. I stood up, legs creaking, and we teetered back and forth before Carlos grabbed the rim and went to work on the keys. Damn it, Bird, you really jam these things good, just like Shaq. We faced the house as Carlos said, got him. We both caught Doug on the phone watching us from behind the shade. Presumably, he was talking to McPherson. He was probably saying that he had a couple of clowns who wanted to do business, that maybe they'd heard of us, the badass solo angels, J. Bird Davis and Carlos Jimenez, who at the moment happened to be playing chicken with an old basketball rim. Not exactly respectable biker behavior, which is exactly why we laughed so hard about it later. Carlos grabbed the rim, did a pull-up and swung over my head, let go and landed hard on the pavement. We walked back to the table and picked up our beers. I put my guns back on. We went inside and no one said anything about it. Doug said we'd have to go see Mark for the 40 cal, but that he'd make it worth our trouble. I said no trouble. We left Fangs and didn't bother to call Slats. Everything was under control and the day was almost done. As promised, the 40 caliber pistol was at Mark's, as were 2 other guns. A Chinese model 213 blue steel, 9mm semi-auto, and a high standard model 22 long round semi-auto target pistol. Mark said the 213 was legit, but that he was unsure about the 22, so be careful with it. As we inspected the guns, I noticed 2 Silver Star medals mounted on the wall of McPherson's living room. I asked who they belonged to. Mark said they were his. I asked, Vietnam? He said, yup. I had to hit an ATM to get enough cash to finish the deal. Doug accompanied me to a nearby Safeway, asking if I had any meth hookups because his stupid wife had done his last rail the night before in Tucson, and he was drier than Death Valley. He also said the Tucson boys had ordered him not to cook or sell meth anymore, even though he still needed half an 8-ball to get by every couple of weeks. I said I'd let him know if I heard anything, that maybe Rudy could help him out. I took out 600. It'd be fun explaining that to Gwen later on. Doug and I went back to finalize everything. Dealing with McPherson gave me a bad feeling. He owned a legitimate bike repair shop that we never got any dirt on, and he was a decorated Vietnam vet. I later discovered that one of the stars was given to him for jumping out of a departing chopper to grab a fellow platoon member who had been shot right before he made the helicopter. Mark had defied a direct order from his CO, who wanted to take off right away since they were taking fire. Mark grabbed the guy and got back on while the pilot waited for them. He came up for both a court-martial and a Silver Star, and the brass had the good sense to give him the latter. I was not into busting guys like McPherson. It wasn't what I was on the job to do. Regardless, it was a good day for Black Biscuit. Carlos and I pulled out of McPherson's $1,500 pour, but that was much richer in the way of small arms and evidence. Carlos called Slats. We decided to meet at the shopping center about 3 miles away. After he hung up, Carlos said, Slats sounded steamed. Well, we got a trunk full of guns. He'll be okay. I don't know. He sounded pretty steamed. We got there first. We parked by a dumpster. Carlos opened the trunk and arranged the firearms to show the boys that we had a good day at the office. Slats pulled up, jumped out, and slammed the door. He was with 2 other task force agents, but they got out of the van more slowly. As Slats walked towards us, he picked up an empty green bottle that lay on the ground. He threw it hard at our feet and it shattered in 1,000 pieces. I yelled, "What the fuck?" "What do you mean, what the fuck? Where were you?" "Buying guns, dude." "Oh, really? Where were you buying these guns?" "At a bad guy's house." "Lighten up. We did good." "Fuck you. Lighten up. You were off the map half the day. You know what that does to my heart?" He pounded his chest. "Jay, anything happens to you, it's my ass. You hear me?" Carlos and I held our tongues, not pointing out that if something happened to us, we were pretty sure it was our asses. I said, but we got a trunk full of guns. Fuck your guns. A young black guy wearing a straight brim Phoenix Suns cap and a leather shirtlean bomber coat that was way too hot for the southern Arizona climate suddenly walked into our circle from behind the dumpster. He surprised Slats, who jumped back. Carlos and I couldn't help but chuckle. Slats didn't like that. He turned on the guy. What are you looking at? Slats pulled his jacket aside, unsnapped his holster, and pulled his revolver half out. I repeat, what are you looking at? Who knows what went through the poor guy's head? He probably thought we were doing a deal. He sure as shit didn't think we were cops. I begged him silently, don't say anything, dude. Just keep going. Just keep going. It must have worked. He turned on his heel and disappeared just as quickly as he had shown up. Jesus, Slats looked like he was about to suffer a coronary. Carlos said, take a breath, Joe. Come see what we got. Slats mumbled, fuck your guns. Then he walked up to the open trunk and looked inside. He nodded. He spat out a strand of brown chalk and stared absently into the trunk. Alright, good work. Try not to go off the map again. It really kills me. I need to know you're safe. In spite of his anger, I knew he'd been really worried about us. He said quietly, Jay, you know me and the guys in the van are responsible for you. I know you think you can climb Everest without help, but I won't let anything shitty happen on my watch. Slats looked hard at me. I'm not pulling into your driveway to tell Gwen you're not coming home because I couldn't keep track of you. Carlos and I said, okay, I added. We won't go off the map again. I knew I was lying. Our ditching Slats wasn't conscious. It was just that we had too much experience and were too used to running our own games. It was bound to happen again. Besides, I really didn't like being minded all the time. Slats turned and walked back to his car. Drive the stuff to the patch for processing. He got in. As he was about to close his door, he leaned out and said, oh, I almost forgot to tell you. Carlos, as of next week, you're off the case. The Miami SAC wants you back. He closed his door and backed out of the lot while Carlos and I stood there staring at each other.